This is CliffCentral.com.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives with Alma-Nalisha and Letlhogonolo.
I think you keep doing this. Hey, like you keep saying Alma-Nalisha. Like, put some respect on your name, Dr. Alma-Nalisha Cele.
Oh yeah. Dr. Alma-Nalisha Cele. Thanks. Thanks for the reminder. So on today's episode of the Cheeky Natives, we're gonna do a check-in. It's been a while since we've actually sat down and just spoken, and Letlhogonolo is going to explain why that's been.
Hi again, everyone. As Alma said, I know a lot of you may follow me on Twitter, or follow our Cheeky Natives account, would know that in July, at the end of July, I left the country to go study in the United States. I went to go do a master's in public interest law and policy, as well as critical race studies at the University of California in Los Angeles, so UCLA. And it's been really difficult for us to come together, right?
I mean, obviously.
But
just a few thousand kilometers.
Yes, 16,000 miles.
He's even speaking in miles.
It's been really interesting. So I've spent 2 months in the United States and
in America. And how's that been?
It's been challenging, you
Why?
know. I think that coming from a predominantly black country, you realize what blackness does, right? Because blackness is performed differently wherever you go, right? And I realized the privilege of being in a predominantly black country. Like, there are a lot of things that I don't have to explain here in South Africa that I've needed to explain in America. And also, like, going to grocery stores, you take for granted that you walk into a store and you pick up what you need, right? There, it's a different story. There is a different measurement. It's measured in pounds. And you're like, I don't know what this translates to. So you need to do that translation. And also, one thing that's been really hard for me is understanding the currency, like the value of money. Like, not necessarily, I know what $1 is. I know what $5 is. But I don't know if I'm paying enough or too much for a particular thing, right? So that's been one of the things that has been really hard for me. And also, I'm realizing how important it is to have like a solid support network, and that's what I had in Johannesburg, like just the solid support network of people that I can meet, talk to, and stuff like that.
Do you find that it's become harder to make friends the older you've become? Like, my friend and I were having this discussion, and I was wondering if I'm just closed off to the concepts of making new friends, or if it's genuinely just a little bit harder to make friends, because you're older. We're not old. We're still young. Black doesn't crack. But you're a little bit more set in your ways. You have set support structures. You have things that work. You and your friends have sort of developed a rhythm inside to the way that you do things. And now you're in this different country. You don't know anybody. I want to say you don't speak the language, because I think American English is so different. But I'm also quite privy. I'm quite aware of the fact that you do speak the language, and I'm sure that's made the adjustments a lot easier as well, you know. But you're also in a very predominantly, UCLA is quite white, you know, from all the pictures you've sent me. I play like spot the black person.
I mean, that's what I do on campus. I'm like, how many black people I see today? Oh my gosh, I saw 3 today. I agree with you. I think it's definitely really difficult to make friends the older you get, because I think it also has to do with how set you are in your ways, but also there's certain things you don't want to compromise on as you get older. You know, I've made a decision that I want to have very little white people as my friends as possible, you know, and going to a place like UCLA, I literally have to seek out the black people and become friends with them. But even the blackness is very broad and expansive in America, right? So it's interesting for me, because I'm just like,
But I'm also very curious as to what the relationship between Africans and African Americans on campus has been. I think there was like a Twitter storm recently because some sort of white supremacist website quoted the black students at Cornell, the African American students at Cornell, as saying they want more African Americans on campus. And I think there was such a storm that it wasn't properly analyzed in ways that that are honest and true, right? I think that the model minority is a thing, and I think sometimes even as Africans, we can be guilty of performing that when we go to those kind of spaces, because whiteness and white supremacy is so overarching that we're constantly feeling the need to perform for the white gaze,
I think that's really true. I mean, I had a conversation with a few Black Americans after the story broke out to sort of understand what their feelings are. And I contrasted it to what we did to foreign nationals who came to our country with the 2008 xenophobic attacks and the recent xenophobic attacks, right? It's this understanding that white people in America and feel that the immigrant who is African is more hardworking than the Black American. And there's this idea that they work harder. And I don't know where it comes from. So it also creates this idea of the model minority. And I feel there are varying views. There are some people who are like, yes, right, there is a history of colonization that was done to the African people, but there's a history of slavery that has happened to Black Americans, right? And they don't have access to tertiary institutions in their country. So but I also think it's not an either-or situation. I think that there can be a space for Africans to exist in universities such as UCLA, but there's also a space for Black Americans to exist, because, I mean, there aren't even that many in the country, right? They're a minority in the United States.
But I think it's very important that Africans abroad, particularly, don't perform for that model minority gaze. I think it's very important. I think that there will be a time when your politics are very, very important on campus, and this will be it. You know what I mean? Because there will be a temptation to be like, oh yeah, these Africans work so hard. It's a completely different, and Sisonke Msimang talks about it so beautifully in her book. And they were coming from such very different backgrounds and very sort of different things. And I don't think that we need to absolve the American institutions of making sure that the Black people of who the backs of Black people are whom the country has been built on, and they have every right to demand reparations and access and inclusion. And I think that it's your responsibility as someone who'd be a model minority to participate in ways that are helpful to that cause. You know what I mean? I think that Blackness is under attack anywhere that you go in the world, and I think it'll be a political statement, the way that you carry yourself forward going on.
And I think for me, just being in that space has really made me think about what you say, that Blackness is under attack anywhere in the world, right? So for us to unite as Black people and for us not to play into white supremacy, because that's effectively what it wants to do. It wants to create differences between the types of Black people that there are. So for me, it's been having those conversations to be like, we are under siege everywhere we go, right?
Every single place.
So we need to be together. And I mean, there's some, the courses that I'm doing really speak about this. I mean, one of the courses that I'm doing at UCLA is Race Conscious Remedies, right? Taught by the Queen, Professor Harris.
Yes, Black Girl Magic.
Like, truly. And we talk about this idea of the model minority and how, like, white supremacy has structured to create a model minority, particularly of the Asian community, right? And there has been a lot of, like, fights against affirmative action in America where Asian people seem to feel that they aren't represented enough in universities, right? But they are. But now what's happening is they're like, no, but we need to get in. And my thought has always been, I think that in some cases it feels like the model minority wants white people to be in university and Asian people. So there isn't a space for Black people to be there. And that has been like something that I've been grappling with and just thinking about.
But also you bring up such an important point, the violence of non-Black people of color. And the ways in which they benefit from white supremacy at the expense of Black people is a really important conversation to have, right? Yeah. And I think that it's really, particularly in the US, it's an important conversation that you're going to continuously have, right? Yeah. Is what does it mean for non-Black people of color to be allies, to Black people? And what does it mean even as an African to be an ally in the US? But I know you woke. I know you will represent us well. But I also think that this journey is a long one and there's lots of room to grow. And sometimes I think in our quest to be woke and conscious, we deprive each other of room to grow and learn and evolve.
I think that's true, but I must say also I've met some incredible people in my time in the United States. Like I have a cohort of like black women who are just slaying, right? Who come from different backgrounds but are absolutely incredible.
I think you're just a magnet for black women slaying. I think you're just a magnet. You just attract them.
So it's been really important to create and foster those relationships. You know, there is a Black Student Law Association at the law school, and there's really a community, a small community, but nevertheless a community of support, right? And outside the law school, I've met also incredible black people who are doing grad programs in the United States. And I mean, I celebrated 2 months on the 1st of October, and then 2 days later, something tragic happened. You know, it was a Tuesday afternoon in the United States, but would have been like 10:30 here in South Africa. I got a phone call from my uncle to tell me that my mom has passed away. It was a really like difficult day because it really made me realize like how far away from who I actually am, right? But like I said, there was a support of people even here back home. I remember how worried you were and like trying to call me all the time just to ensure that I'm okay, even though it was like almost 11 p.m. here in South Africa. And I remember just black people showing up, like even the black people in LA just showing up. Like I don't remember a time Tuesday afternoon towards the evening, even Wednesday before I left to come back to South Africa, where there wasn't someone who was with me or someone checking up on me. And I think it speaks to the importance of like of botho ba rona as black people, right? There is a certain type of humanity in who we are. Yeah, in who we are. Like there are people who didn't know me from a bar of soap, but who showed up, right? And who are like, we will stay with you. But I'm really grateful, although I had to come back under these circumstances of coming to bury my mom, I'm really grateful that everything worked out. I mean, I found out on Tuesday, I was on a flight on Wednesday, I got you on Friday. So I was really grateful that even in the midst of such difficulty, like God had orchestrated it in such a way that I was able to come and bury my mom.
And what has been the biggest thing or biggest lesson that your mom's passing has taught you? I think you've had time to, you know, process and think, and I think we've sort of spoken about grief and loss a lot, but I also think we're a community that doesn't really speak about those kinds of feelings. I think we're a community who's so used to pain and suffering that we don't take the time to adequately process these really big, painful, tragic things that happen to us.
I mean, I learned a few things, but I think one of the important things that I learned is during the last bit of our relationship, right? My mom and I had a very difficult relationship, which you are aware of. And it was difficult to try and be there for my mom when there was difficulty in how we were communicating, right? But I think preparing for her funeral this past week made me realize that sometimes our parents make mistakes and sometimes our parents make us angry, and we hold on to this anger that we don't realize the important things that our parents have taught us, right? I remember my mom leaving her parents' house to go build a shack, Kustokonstok in Kimberley. And that is where she raised me, in that shack, you know, and she started a tuck shop to send me to school, right? I remember that I learned about the Pan-Africanist movement, about Robert Mangaliso Sebukwe and Stephen Bantu Biko from my mom, right? Who people will say didn't have an education, a qualification, but my mom was an intelligent woman, right? I remember reminiscing and listening to Nobanzi, which is on Lebo Mashile and Majola's album, Moya. Please get yourself a copy. And Nobanzi is a story about Majola's grandmother, who was an informal trader who raised him. And one thing that he said in Nobanzi is that finally she's written down somewhere. That is something that no one can take away from her, right? So that's what I learned. I learned that even in the difficulties of our relationship with our parents, we shouldn't forget the sacrifices that I have made to make us who we are. And another thing that I learned is, as black people, guys, we need to think of a new language of grieving and funerals because it's a lot of money and it's unnecessary. Like for me, how are the grieving people the ones providing for everyone else? You know, I'm wondering if it's always been like that, and I know it's always been like that, but how are you losing your mom and you're the one who has to nagekela for the people the whole week and the Saturday and not have time to mourn
to
the
process
loss.
and to grieve, right? And how do you grieve adequately when you're worried about money and how things are going to get done and how things are going to get paid? And it makes me wonder if we don't need new ways of doing things.
I definitely think we do. I was saying that if I pass away, I want people to spend a maximum of 2 days and then bury me on the third day. Just because I think also the financial implications of the people who are left behind, right? So you spend so much money on these funerals, but khalina sepe when you're done with the funeral. What about the children who are left behind? What about the family that is left behind? Who's going to take care of them if we're spending 40,000 rand on a funeral?
But also, and I've been thinking about that, and maybe it's also the idea that for a lot of black people, the dignity and the rest only comes in death, and because that's what it is. Our funerals then become these grand, massive occasions. Do you know what I mean? Because they also become a meeting point because you haven't seen people in 5 years, and now you have to meet. But they also become like the eruption of family drama and family things. And I do think that we need to find new ways of doing things and new ways of grieving and new ways of expressing our pain. It can't be that we think that. Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying, that you were the one who's bereaved. You were in all of this. This was a tragedy. This was a really big tragedy in your life. And there wasn't even a moment to breathe because you had to be organizing a caregiver for people,
And I mean, I think, though, in some ways, what can be said about the process is that it really confronts, allows you to confront the feelings that you have and the emotions, right? In preparing, choosing the casket, in ensuring choosing the clothing, and finalizing the program, I found that there was a form of acceptance that I got, in finally accepting that my mom has passed away. And the best thing for me to do is to ensure that she rests in dignity. And I find that there was such a peace after her funeral that I had, that whatever difficulties we may have had, the fact that she was resting in peace and resting with dignity resolved everything that we had gone through in the last years of my life and her life. But my mom was young. She was 50, and it's just unfair that, we need to grow up so early on, need to be confronted with big decisions. I mean, one of the decisions that I had to deeply think about is the decisions of whether I wanted to go back to LA. Because there are people who need to be taken care of here. There are things that need to be taken care of. And even me, am I going to be able to cope when I get to LA? Like, my support structure is here. Like, my friends, you guys have showed up in ways that have been miraculous in the week. But you're going to be 16,000 miles away. And the flight is horrible. Like, I'm all by myself. So those are the things that I've been thinking about. But then I realized that, this is how we honor our parents. My mom has gone. She's resting in peace. And I don't think she would have wanted me to stay. I think she would have wanted me. She wants me to go and finish what I started, and it's unfortunate because there was these grand plans of her flying to LA for my graduation. And now it's not going to happen, and that's the sad part.
And I think it's also the weight, right, of grief is that it comes in waves. It comes that there will be times when you really do feel that you have processed, you've come to closure, and there will be times when it hits you all over again. And I think it's really important that you give yourself the room to feel the full spectrum of those emotions. I think that often as a community we feel like we need to get to the business of doing things, but sometimes healing is the business of doing things.
Yeah.
And this improper healing and it's also an understanding that you may never fully heal. There will never be anyone who's like your mother in your life ever again. And there was no one who's ever going to take her place, and there's no one who can replace her. We try as we may, we'll never find anyone who can replace your mom. And I think that part of the healing will be the acceptance of that. And the feeling of the full spectrum. You don't owe anyone strength. You don't owe anybody the superhuman ability to get over these massive, big, painful things that happen to us in order for other people's comforts to be realized, And I think people who are uncomfortable with your healing will not be your friends. They will not be people that you need to have in your life.
No, that's true. I think also taking it 1 second at a time some days and 1 day at a time on other days, just realizing that you're a human being and there are days when you won't be okay. There are days when you won't want to get out of bed, right? But I think also as we grow older, I've become a little more practical. I'm like, things need to get done, Life doesn't give you a moment to process, So I need to now go back to LA and I just need to
study.
Go back into it. But I think there's a comfort in knowing that the funeral went well, this is really difficult, but I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be fine. So yeah.
Amen.
So yes, what's up with you, Dr. Cele? What's happening with you?
What would you like to know, Tloki? I feel like with attorneys, there's always just there's a little bit more to the question.
No, I'm like, what's happening in your life?
So I'm in a very interesting space of navigating what it means to be young, black, educated, and sort of working in systems that are unfair. I think when I started medicine and when I became a doctor, I had all these beautiful plans, oh my God, I'm going to change the world. And I don't know if I've lost some of that sort of idealism, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I'm still working through it. I think I'm confronted with the visceral reality of what it means to be poor and black and at the mercy of public systems in this country, of what it means to have to wait in a queue for 4 hours so that you receive healthcare because this is it. There is no mill park for you, And if anything, it sort of made me realize the urgency of the black condition and why it cannot be that middle-class black people sit on our laurels and we relax, right? Why it is going to be the calling of our generation, to really improve the black condition, right? It's and now I'm working in obs and gynae, and I'm just like, wow. My friend said this so perfectly the other day. She was like, nothing will make you realize how trashy men are more than working in a woman dominated speciality or in a woman dominated field. I've just really had confrontations with the ugliness of what it means to be a woman and to be poor and to be young and to be black in this country, and the vulnerabilities that you're exposed to by virtue of your position in life, and the privilege that so many people sort of take for granted, so access to things like contraception, education on contraception, social supports, those things are massive. Those things are what render black women in these endless cycles that we find ourselves. And I think if there's ever been a time for me to really sort of become more of a feminist, it has to have been this experience of working in obstetrics and gynae and seeing the kind of things that women are subjected to, seeing that when a woman comes in and is assaulted, it's most likely to be an intimate partner or to be a family member, and the fact that men are trashy, right? We always talk about how you have these little 14, 15-year-olds in the ward, but no one wants to have the real conversation as to who is impregnating these 14 and 15-year-olds and what it means for you to be a grown man making a 15-year-old pregnant. What are the implications? You are a rapist, and we don't use that kind of language. We use the kind of language of shaming, of victim blaming. We want to put women into boxes as though the circumstances that women find themselves in are directly related to their intelligence or their actions, as opposed to them being a direct result of the situations that women find themselves in.
I mean, I have, I guess, two questions. One is, you and I speak a lot about, white supremacy and the system that we find ourselves in. And I'm trying to understand, in a predominantly black serving hospital, I would imagine that there are a lot of white doctors there, and how that relationship is with people who are poor, right? Because I find that sometimes white people take a liking into you because you are educated. But what happens when you aren't, and when you're unable to speak their language, right? But you're here to provide a service. So that's the one question. And then the other question that I have is, you and I speak a lot about the idea of progress, right? The fact that if I work in a law firm, or if I'm an attorney, or if I become an advocate or any legal practitioner, that whatever space I find myself in, I shouldn't leave it like that in 10 years, right? Do you find that there are black doctors in Barra that have sort of broken down the barriers of access so that young black doctors can feel like they can be mentored by them, or also that it's easier? It's easier.
So, interesting questions, and I think, geez. So, with regards to whiteness or white doctors, look, even in spaces where you're on equal footing, when you're both attorneys or you're both doctors, navigating those relationships is always going to be tainted by white supremacy and privilege. And I think it is magnified in those kind of situations where people are desperate and require help. I think it's always going to be difficult for you to say to somebody who is helping you, actually, I don't like the way that you're speaking to me, and I think it's really, a lot of times I come home very angry at the interactions that I've seen, just because I think that there's been interactions where I felt that there was a lack of humanity, that if this had been a white woman or if this had been a white person, you would not be speaking loudly because they are not responding to your English, You would not be assuming that their intelligence is directly related to their inability to speak English. You would not be assuming that these people should be grateful that they're receiving healthcare, that your interactions with them would be very, very different. It wouldn't be this like white savior industrial complex that I'm helping people, that you would come from a much, much different terms of negotiation and dealing with people. And I think it is infuriating sometimes as a black doctor to find yourself in those kind of situations because you literally just want to scream. You're like, what is wrong with you as a person that you feel that it's appropriate to be speaking to someone who's your mother's age with disdain and just like disgust? Do you know what I mean? And this inability for a lot of my colleagues to empathize and to place themselves in their patients' shoes is concerning to me. Like when you interact with black patients, like this is the first time we've interacted with a black person, I get concerned, I'm like, so how do you treat your helper? How do you treat your gardener? How do you treat all these other black people who come into contact with you? And also, does this then just reinforce all of these ideas that you have? And I've also wanted to be very careful about not performing for the white gaze. So when my patients come and do things and I'm like, oh, I've oftentimes just been like, you need to self-correct and not believe that these people, because sometimes you have this thing with basifakela amahloni, why benza kanje, labelungu bazothini ngathi. But I've also, this has been a year of just self-correction, that black people do not have to behave well for anybody except ourselves.
And I think the important question that I've always had, right, is, but what is behaving well, right? So we have grown up in white supremacy. We have grown up in systems that have told us to act a certain way in order for us to be good, right? And now we go back to this community and our people behave in manners that are acceptable to them. And then we're like, hey man, so I've had to, like you, come correct and be like, no, like, why is this set to be unacceptable?
And so when patients can't speak English, I remember having an interaction with the nurse, and the patient was Venda speaking, and I couldn't speak Isivenda, the sister couldn't speak Isivenda, and we needed the patient's consent for a procedure. And she's like, these people, and I just don't know why they can't speak English. I'm like, and immediately I'm like, what? What just happened? Is this a black woman chastising a patient because she can't speak English, as though our people owe anyone English? We don't owe anyone English, right? And this has been powerful for me in that respect. We don't owe anyone English. This is a country that has 11 official languages. This is a predominantly black country. If anything, it is a failing on my part that I'm unable to communicate with this patient in Isivenda, That is the failing, that we sat in the ward in a country that has a population of 80% of black people, and we couldn't find a person who spoke Isivenda. That was a failing on our part. Yeah. And I think a lot of the time we coddle my colleagues, so there will always be someone who comes and translates for you for the benefits of the patients. But what would be for the benefit of the patients would be you being able to communicate with that person without there being a third party there. You know what I mean? Would be you affording your patients the dignity to communicate with you without them having to do the mental gymnastics that it takes to speak in your fourth language. When you're in pain, when you're sick, when you're ill. I mean, and I've been dumbfounded by people telling me things like they're learning Mandarin when they can't pronounce this. I'm like, homie, but You know what I'm saying? You're unable to render a service adequately. You can't even speak to this person. How are you learning Mandarin? And I think I've been really exposed to privilege and cultural imperialism and the entitlement that people have, you know, and it's been a shock. It's been an actual culture shock. I think that this middle class upbringing that I've had sort of shielded me from a lot of things. So my friends are all university educated, they're all upwardly mobile. And it's been the realization that, shucks, this Rainbow Nation really hasn't been good to Black people.
Yeah.
It really hasn't been. It's been like someone taking, you know, when people talk about like I had a Damascus experience and the scales fell off my eyes. We practice this feminism and this Black consciousness in spaces of comfort and privilege. But this year, Barra's been in education in what your politics are, if they come correct, for people who look like you, who could have been you had they had the access to the same resources and the same sort of social support, you know?
And I think it ties in nicely to the second question that I asked, you know. So because there has been a failing for Black people, and there has been this little access for Black people to occupy these spaces, do you feel that senior Black doctors have made it easier for you to navigate the space? Or even just to navigate medicine?
So, I mean, I have 3 brilliant Black women that it would be remiss of me not to speak about them. So Dr. Tlaleng Mufokeng, who is just Black Girl Magic.
Yes.
Dr. Khomotso Matabe, who's also Black Girl Magic. She's my mentor. And Dr. Cindy Fensale, you know. And
Oh, yes, saying to these Black women who
these Black women are
doing
brilliant.
things.
And I think in a lot of ways where I felt that the hospital or seniors at the hospital have failed me, these women have come in and just mediated and have filled in the gap. And I'm very grateful that these women exist. But it's also been very concerning to me that I had to go outside of the spaces I was in order to find those mentors and those people. And that me being a young Black doctor at Bara, I couldn't... Look, there are senior doctors who've come in and really helped me, but I also do feel that there's been a massive gap, and I think it also speaks to, I think this happens in corporate as well.
Yes,
that you know that just because there's a senior Black person in power somewhere, that you as a young Black person doesn't necessarily mean much for you. You know? It might even make things a little bit harder for you because there's this magical Negro who, despite all of the difficulty that they might have found themselves in, has managed to navigate and make it work. And how dare you then complain?
So I feel like that has happened to me when I was in corporate, right? Where I was told, like, it was harder for me, you know, and I made it in spite of it. So why can't you? And I think for me, that's the challenging thing. I'm like, we can't be fighting this 15 years down the line. I want our children or people who look up to us to walk and take ownership of places like Bara and corporate. Because, as you said, 80% of this country is Black, and why aren't we owning these spaces?
And can it be better for you as a young Black child that there is a Black person there, as opposed to it being more difficult because this person has navigated all of these difficulties? And how dare you then complain about having to navigate the same difficulties? And I think that as a people, we need to change the way that we look at progress, right? Progress is not the fact that you are the magical Negro, you are the only Black person sitting at the table, and this obsession with first black syndrome in a country that is 80% Black is a major failing on our parts, right?
And also a deep revelation of white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
The fact that in 2017 we've got a first Black or an only Black first Black woman. I'm just like, it doesn't make sense, right? Because 80% of these people are
Black.
Yeah. And also it's been 22 years since democracy. Or whatever, however many years it's been. Yeah, 23 years since democracy. So, like, how are we still talking about first Black and only Black? And like you said, it's an indictment on education. It's an indictment on the democracy that we are still fighting for access in places where we're supposed to have them.
I must say that, though, I've felt that Black women have showed up for me every single time. Even as a doctor, I felt that Black female doctors have showed up constantly over and over again, and sometimes it's just the camaraderie of knowing that there's someone who looks. Representation is important.
Yeah,
it's massive, you know. But I also think we need to move past the point where it's just about representation, and it's about making real concrete moves with that representation? Can the fact that there's a black woman heading up that department mean something?
And
For
what do you
me.
think? I mean, I realize in corporate what happened when one of the firm that I used to work for, there's a only black team, right? So the man, that's what progress looked like for him. He's like, I will only train black lawyers and I will only have a black team. And do you think that's the type of progress, substantive progress that you're talking about? The idea that if you are in obs and gynae, that the team is only black. It's only black women who are in obs and gynae.
Definitely, and it has to be cognizant of the fact. I think sometimes we want to play nice, and we want to be reconciliatory, and we want to be sweet about things that really just require an urgency, you know. So when I was in my first rotation, I was doing trauma. There were 3 black doctors in the units of more than 10 people. 3 black. There were no senior black doctors when I was there, you know, because obviously they rotate and whatever. But I'm talking consultants, I'm talking like senior doctors, there were none, you know. Then I went on to my next rotation, and then it was just me and this black woman, and that was about it, you know. In terms of juniors, yeah, there were 2 or 3 sort of black consultants, but in a team, I'm like, so where are the brown people? And now I'm in a team that is quite brown, you know, and it's beautiful, and it reflects even in the way that there's something freeing about not having to perform for a gaze, you know. So when you walk in and you can speak isiZulu and you're like, yes, girl, you know, and having someone who understands the cultural nuances has been great. And I think we're so afraid of being called reverse racist and reverse whatever and all this other nonsense that doesn't exist.
Sense, right?
That we are afraid to take ownership and to really walk into spaces and transform those spaces. Because surely in 2017 there can't ever be places where there are no senior black doctors. How? Why? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. For me, it's been challenging that, you know, at UCLA, for instance, what happens is that you have these organizations, but you can't ban people from entering these organizations. So you've got the Black Law Students Association, but white people can be members. And I'm like, oh, obviously because you don't want to be prejudicial, you know, and stuff like that. But I think that for me, what is important is that there should be a space for certain types of people. Like, you know, Black Girls Only is an important space for black women to show up and to enjoy and be melanated in their blackness, right? A black queer social should be for black queer people, right? I know the idea of people talking about allyship and what about the allies wanting to be there? I'm like, no, then create your own allyship organization.
And also when you are there, can you not be there and then want to take over the space? Do you know what I'm saying? So you are there as an ally and you are then wanting to be president of the Black Lawyers Association. But why? But how?
So for me, that's the thing that I'm having difficulty with allyships being in our spaces, right, is the fact that they take up space even when they don't take up space. You know, so the idea that they're going to make comments, and it's interesting because I don't know if I've experienced true allyship for me to be like, this is what it looks like. The allyship that I've experienced is a sort of violence and a sort of taking up of space.
And I think it speaks to you not being cognizant of your privilege, that you're wanting to be in what should be a safe space for marginalized people and you're still wanting to exert your privilege. Like, it drives me insane, you know? Can women talk about Me Too without men wanting to be like, not all men? You had plenty of time to talk about not all men. Why did not all men have to come in response to women talking about their difficulties, you know? And it's just the kind of violence that's making me wonder if people understand what allyship is, or they're so invested in their privilege that they choose not to participate in allyship in ways that are true and sustainable.
So for me, that's why I feel like allyship is hogwash. Like, I'm just like, I feel like in some ways it's like you want to recognize that you know that there's a problem and be patted on the back, and you aren't willing to do the actual work that comes with being an advocate for someone who doesn't have a voice, you know, who doesn't have a penis to speak to men, who doesn't have a skin color to speak to certain people, who isn't cisgendered, who isn't cis heterosexual. For me, it's those type of things. I feel that, I don't know, like there should be an organization, you know, or something where people are like, this is what it looks like for you to exercise allyship. I remember having a conversation with, you know, we were talking about one of the courses that I'm doing at UCLA is critical race theory. And we're talking about this idea of I guess we're talking about race, and we're talking about movements like Black Lives Matter and Fees Must Fall, right? And I questioned one of the white woman who was there, and I said to her, I need to know from you what your allyship, what your advocacy looks like every day, because I think you like the idea of being an ally, but what do you do every day, you know? And she gave me some examples, and I'm like, but in that you choose which things to look out for and which things to be a part of, right? And for me, that's the privilege. The privilege is like, I can't step outside of my skin and not be black. You know, I can't step outside of not protecting my people. And that's the problem for me, is that allyship needs to look like everyday continuous work.
Every single day. And can it reflect in your lived politics? So don't come to me and tell me about how you thought so and so was inappropriate, but not call them out in the time and the space that you have, because
Exactly.
there's a protection that your privilege affords you that will never be afforded to me as a black woman, right? So when I call things out and I get called angry and whatever because you have been unable to call out your uncle in your house, and now your uncle is misbehaving in my presence, do you know what I'm saying? So it's those kind of things. It's that you know that you have these racist, these foul-mouthed, these poorly behaved relatives, and you are unable to call them out, but you want to call yourself an ally. Allyship is literally a lived practice. It's not a people want to make this stuff like, oh, you know, it's the theory of things. It's not. It's a lived practice, right? Because I live as a black woman. I'm never ever going to be able to take my skin off. I'm never going to be able to not be a black woman. So that is my lived experience. So when you have all this privilege and you want to be an ally and be patted on the back for being a decent human being, I have some feelings. I have some actual feelings about that.
I agree with you. Are you reading anything at the moment?
So I'm currently reading, I just finished Sisonke Msimang's Always Another Country. Stay tuned for our podcast where we discuss Always Another Country. I just finished The Association of Small Bombs and Angela Makolwa's The Blessed Girl. I'm about to get into Tane Hisi quotes, which is a gift.
Between the World and Me?
Between the World and Me, which is a gift from a very special individual.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I'm reading at the moment. I do want to read Tandega Gugubele as well, writing Sulima Donsela's memoir.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm reading at the moment. What are you planning to read into?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so the book is called No Longer Whispering to Power. Yeah. Please support books by Black women.
I mean, I've just finished reading Broken Men by Farrakhan. He released a chapbook, which is important because it starts tackling toxic black masculinity and conversations that men should have with each other. So that's what I really appreciated about the book. And hopefully we'll have him on the podcast and then we'll dissect these topics about black masculinity. I've finished Between the World and Me by Tana Hisi. So I'm waiting for you to finish so we can do a podcast and hopefully get him to come and join us on the podcast. What else? I'm waiting for I've also finished Always Another Country by Sisonke Msimang, and stay tuned for the podcast. What else am I reading? That's interesting. I don't know. I mean, there is a lot of like books on my radar. Oh yes, I've actually got a copy of Kwezi by Reddy Klabe.
I also want to read Kwezi.
Yeah, and I'm going to start reading that as well.
So we've spoken a lot about I think very heavy sort of topics.
Yeah.
Clockley, tell us. I've seen you tweet quite a bit, and I'm just like, hey, who is this person that my friend is just always, pay life, pay things, pay this, pay that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the developments? Because, I mean, I was starting to get worried. You'd been perennially single. I might, this time last year.
Yeah, it was rough. It was a rough period in our lives.
It was terrible. It was a horrible period in our lives.
Actually, you're right, because this is October. This was a very difficult period in our lives.
This is a horrible period. As I was driving, I was actually thinking about how I always used to frown on people sort of crying in public spaces. I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with these people? And I had a very public sort of meltdown in your car this time last year.
It's rough. I mean,
it's cool that we can laugh about it now, but it also speaks to sort of having the kind of social support where you can really, really fall apart.
Yeah.
And fall apart for a multitude of reasons.
I remember, the quote we always like by Adrian Rich,
Yes.
been counted as warriors. Even
Surely
while
there are those among us to whom we can sit down and weep and still be counted as warriors.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I need to speak to Bay to find out if I'm allowed to divulge this information. But yes,
I mean, we don't want his name or social security number.
I'm in a relationship.
Tell us more.
I mean, it's been an interesting relationship. Just because I'm learning a lot about myself. I'm a very independent person, as you know. So, right, this relationship has taught me to lean on support in different ways, right? And it's been an empowering relationship of having someone who's like, what do you want to do and how can I support you? You know, I've never had that sort of backing in my life where I'm not performing my love for anyone, but I'm literally in spaces and in someone who's like, I want you to achieve your dreams and I'm going to be here when you achieve your dreams. So it's been magical.
I love it. Yes, to black love. Hashtag.
I mean, I see you're dragging me here out on the street. So round about the same time that I started this Bay Life situation, you started tweeting interesting things as well.
Really?
You know?
Like, I have no recollection of these tweets that you seem to seek out.
You know, everyone, you retweeting how when people were talking about being in like healthy, good loving relationships, you're like, oh, I know this feeling. So
Same WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
Same WhatsApp group.
So tell us about, you know, where the space you're in right now.
So it's an interesting space. In the sense that I'm having to rethink all of my ideas of what I thought love was. I think we had these very rigid ideas that love is this and this and this and this, and in terms of like material things, you know. So I don't think that prior to this relationship I'd had a very clear understanding of what love is in the practice of love, you know. And now I'm with somebody who is, you know, so Alicia Harris says that if I had to describe you, I would say that you are a wealth of Sundays, you know. And when you think of Sunday, like Sunday is just this glorious, magical day of rest and being black girl magic and being black excellence and being all of these things. I often felt that I wasn't afforded a space where I could take off all these performances that I had to do and just rest my bones. And there was a quote where someone was like, and I think if I had to describe it, it would be exactly that someone once said that they were speaking about their partner, and I was so mad that I hadn't thought of this line first. I'm like, oh, these are bars. Why didn't I think of this? And she described her partner as being a place of rest for weary souls. And I was like, sounds about babe. Sounds about bae.
And I mean, I think it's interesting, you know, before I left, I got to meet your bae. You got to meet my bae.
Hey, bae, thanks.
And it was quite interesting, you know, the encounter that was happening in the kitchen when we were having dinner, when people were washing dishes over wine, right? And just the connection of these two people who are important or have become important to both of us, connecting in the levels and in the ways that they have, right? For me, it speaks to who we are. It speaks to the idea of, because of who we are, the people we will attract and the people we will be with are likely to end up being good for each other or being like have good relations with each other, right? And also just like the lunch dates that we've had prior to me leaving, right? Just
couple dates, hey.
So for me, what was important, right, is for me to be in a space where I could see you and your partner and I could see how happy you are, right? But I could also see you not performing and not being someone you're not. You know, that has been important for me, to watch you come into yourself and have someone allow you the space to be who you are in your fullness. Because sometimes you enter these relationships and people are like, you need to pipe it down because like, who are you? And
also feeling that you have to become lesser of who you are and you have to diminish yourself in order to be this person that is acceptable, that isn't threatening, that isn't too loud, that isn't too bold. And I think that's a real worry for black women, you know, because we're always getting told that we're too much. We're too much of this, we're too much of that. And it's been so great to be with somebody that allows you the space to be fully yourself and to be the full spectrum of things. And even on days when I just don't feel like being black girl magic, you know, I just don't. I just want to be my inner mediocre white man. and And to be with somebody who doesn't feel that I'm any lesser, or the way that they see me is not diminished by humanity, by being a person, by being real, by being vulnerable, and by breaking sometimes, because sometimes you need to fall apart to come together, you know?
No, that's true. I think for me, I'm a really intense person, right? So for me to find someone who enjoys my intensity has been important, right? And also for me, I ask really dumb questions. You know, I ask like the dumbest questions. And to have someone be like, I don't want to be smart inside this relationship, right? I want to ask the dumb question. You're telling me you're going to eat, and I'm going to ask you a question, are you going to eat? Like, you know, like those type of things. But also to have like morning conversations where we talk about corporate governance, right? Just like the pillow talk.
Can we have a moment to, you know, when people's pillow talk is corporate governance? Yeah. Levels, good Dean. There are actual levels.
So, I mean, it's been important for me to a reclamation of like everything that has been lost, right? You know, it's like, what does it feel like to fall in love? Like everything that was stolen is coming back to you. And that has been it.
I love that. I was actually thinking about, because today's our anniversary, hey.
And mine was yesterday, hey.
And look, I'm also learning to be more expressive, you know? And I think it's easy to be expressive with somebody who is cognizant of your feelings. So when you say, I am upset about this translates into real changes in behavior, or real changes in whatever, you know. And so when I was writing, I was actually thinking about that. And also I think that we often talk about you shouldn't look to anybody else for your healing, you know. But I do think that relationships, like friendships, can be very healing. They can be very good for your spirit and for your sense of self, and I think sometimes we, in our quest to be, I'm strong, I don't need anybody, you know, all of these tropes that Black women have been forced to perform have not really been given room to experience the full spectrum of what it means to have somebody love you in ways that are honest and that are good and that are in keeping with your love language, right? So for someone to love you in ways that don't make you feel like you've had to make yourself smaller in order for them to have an appreciation of who you are has been powerful.
Yes, I mean, thank you for the catch-up. I think it was quite entertaining.
I feel like I lost a lot of my third card in that last section. I let it go. Like,
even me, I feel like you tricked me. You were like, come out of
No,
there.
but it's also because I think it's very important that in all of our intellectualizing of our lived experience, we give ourselves room to feel the things that we feel and to feel them honestly. I think I was talking to my friend about this whole thing of like not wanting to put Bay on social media because, you know, what if it doesn't work out? What if it fails? And I feel like we've become so stunted in the way that we express our emotions that we're worried that, like, the biggest concern that you have is incompatibility. Incompatibility is not a crime. If you're incompatible, you're incompatible. And I think that if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't. And if it does, then it's great and it's magical. And if it doesn't, then you've learned. And this was not the person who needed to be there for you or who needed to be in your life. And surely that the fact that you put them on social media, you know, that fear that people might be laughing at you because Beck will post to Bay and it didn't work out. Like, no.
Yeah. No, I think we need to stop focusing on what people do. I think that's the problem. I think we're too concerned about what people are doing that we aren't living our lives. So for me, what's important is make your own decisions. If you want to post Bear on social media, it's your social media, and not be worried about whether it's going to work out or not, because relationships don't work out, or they do, you know. But yes, thank you so much for this catch up. I really enjoyed, like, you know, hearing you speak about a variety of things, like showing yourself in the full spectrum. We talk a lot about books, but we really don't get to talk about ourselves and where we're at. So thank you.
It's been great to catch up. I think that just speaks to the kind of friendship that we had, that we've gone from speaking about feminism and sort of radical politics to grief and tragedy and loss and to love as well. You know, it's sort of been all the same conversation. It's been great. And every time I speak to you, I learn something. And even if it's just about myself, it's great, you know. And I do think we date our friends, like... Legit. I'm convinced that we date our friends, but that is a conversation for a whole different day. But yeah, I'm thrilled with watching you grow into yourself. It's beautiful to watch you become the person that we've always known you to be, but to be unapologetically yourself, whether that is in what you're studying, so within academics, be it in your relationships with people, be it in Bay Life.
Hey, Bay Life.
But it's beautiful to
Hashtag love lives here.
Hashtag yes. It's beautiful to watch that, and I can only imagine that you're going to go from strength to strength in the process of really becoming who you are, because it takes a lot of courage to grow into who you want to be and not who other people think you should be.
No, that's true. And I think, I tell you, and I'm soppy all the time, right? And I tell you about how an absolutely incredible person you are. But I think it's important for me to say it again. Thank you for saving my life. The time that I had met you, I was performing a lot of my life, and I think that you came into my life to love me, for me, not for any performance, not for any academics, not for any reading, not for any accolades, not for any black girl magic, not for any black boy magic, nothing. You came to love me because you saw Letlhogonolo. So thank you for that. Thank you for showing me love in its unobliterated form, right? Thank you for showing me like the love that, Jonathan and David speak about. Thank you for showing me a love that is pure, right? And I think I learn a lot from you, and one thing that I'm learning from you is constantly in our relationship, when have to come correct, you call me out, right? And in calling me out, you always remind me I'm calling out the action and not the person. I still love you for who you are, right? The thing that you do doesn't determine who you are. And that's something that I've had to learn, because most of the time when people correct us, we think it's an indictment on who we are. But you've come to teach me that it's different. We are different. It's the action. Come correct with the action. But who you are is still the same person that I love.
And on that note, we will end today's podcast. We're so grateful to all the massive support that we received for the Cheeky Natives. You guys give us strength to just keep going in our quest to be archivists of black literature, of black excellence, of black people telling their stories without performing for a gaze.
Stay tuned.
This is CliffCentral.com.